Okay, not a problem. Thank you everyone for joining. Um, just to give you guys a little bit of background, I mean, I see a little bit of what's in your glasses, but what are people's wine preferences? Just generally speaking, like what do you like to drink?
Yeah, we got hot, white, bubbles, red, Chardonnay. Yeah, they're yelling them all out. So yes.
Cool.
Wine.
Okay, awesome. Well, I mean, so kind of as Stephanie mentioned, I mean, we're in Prince Edward County, right? And we're a fairly boutique winery. So we started, as a lot of wineries do, back in 2011, 2012, kind of as a hobby project for my parents, actually. I thought it would keep them busy. But they wised up pretty quickly. And so, but as these things go, right, wineries are a lot of work. And it's a lot of, as anything, I think, like there's a lot of stuff below the surface that you don't really see. But so because it was sort of their, you know, sort of, it was supposed to be fun and not necessarily, you know, sort of, we looked at it in terms of like, what could we do that would keep the winery fairly small and intimate, but still sort of have really interesting stuff that people would want. If you haven't been here before, like we're pretty remote, like we're, Prince Edward County is about 2 hours east of Toronto. We're sort of in the lake, in the middle of Lake Ontario a little bit. And then ourselves, like as the winery, we're kind of on a gravel road, which turned off of another gravel road. So like we're a little bit hidden. And so we wanted something that would people would always come back to, right? And so we wanted to build this idea of this like sort of very esoteric kind of winery. We weren't looking to make the same things year after year. And, you know, we wanted things to be different and, you know, just kind of embrace the idea of vintage variation and embrace, you know, what that season is versus what another season might be. So we weren't looking to kind of necessarily build sort of a portfolio of wines of always having staples, which is, you know, how a lot of wineries build their businesses. Our winemaker, Mackenzie, joined us in 2015. And I think since that time, we sort of went down that route in terms of a lot of more pushing the boundaries on a lot of the wines that we make and the wine styles that we make. And so a lot of the ones that Stephanie actually picked up are kind of like what I would call wines that are a little bit on our funkier side, right? And I don't really want to say that there's two sides, but everything that we try to do here, it's all wild fermented. We don't add anything out of a box. It's really just working with the grapes that year and trying to kind of reflect them. It sounds kind of cheesy, but like, you know, not making the wines per se, but sort of guiding the wines a little bit more. And so, you know, you have to, I guess, be ready to sort of, you know, go with that a little bit and kind of let things go a little bit, not really sure of exactly what you're going to end up. Luckily, I think Mackenzie's a really great winemaker. I think she's knowledgeable, super talented, very intuitive in terms of palate and structure. So I think all of the wines that we make, I mean, I like to say they're delicious, but there's also a lot of tension in there, and there's some like there's a lot of new flavors that, you know, people may not have tried before, but I think they're interesting. And I think, you know, if wine isn't interesting, why make it, right? So I will say there's still a few wines that we sort of have that are on the more classic side of the portfolio. The county is known for Chardonnay for all the reasons that you've probably heard about, right? Climate, the limestone, the sort of the lack of soils that we have. So you get this really nice flintiness in Chardonnays here. And you get a lot of that in a lot of the early ripening varieties. So if anyone has any Chardonnay, I think we do it really well. Again, each vintage, even though it's on the classic side of the menu, each vintage is totally different than the following vintage maybe, right? So weather really does play a huge role in that grape. I see a couple orange-ish wines on the table. So does anyone have the Carbogoo, the orange wines, the Eau Julius, those ones? Awesome. Okay. Orange wines are not a new thing. They're actually a really old thing, and is the way a lot of white wine was made back in the day, so centuries and actually millennia ago. So this wine technique actually dates back about 6,000 years, back to Georgia and Eastern Europe. And it's only been in the last probably 10 years or so where it's been a presence in North America, right? So we started making a lot of orange wines back in 2015. And I think they're really fantastic because they really show you the whole grape. You're not just working with the inside of the berry, but you're working with the inside, the skins, all of those different flavor components. And so I think they can make some really interesting, complex wines. And a lot of times wines that drink kind of half white, half red, right? They have maybe sometimes a little bit more of the aromatics of a white or white wine grapes, but then in terms of body and texture, they're really more akin to a red wine. So they're super great food pairing wines. You can pair them with literally anything. Japanese food, sushi, great with a lot of mushroomy, sort of umami kind of characteristics in food, and those kind of those elements play really well. If anyone has any pet nat in the glass, nope. One, okay. Yeah, pet nat is a really fun sparkling wine as well. So it's also one of those old wine techniques that has sort of made a comeback in the last few years. And it's the way it's actually the oldest winemaking or the oldest sparkling winemaking technique, I believe, developed in the 1500s by the French monks who make a lot of great alcohol. But it's essentially one fermentation. So you bottle the wine as it's fermenting. So you get these really light bubbles, really still very fruit focused sparkling wines. So again, really crushable wines that you necessarily don't have to age. And again, has a lot of those characteristics that you might find in things like kombucha. Sometimes there's a little bit of a tea-like note. Sometimes there's a little bit of funk on them. But funk is something that we kind of embrace. As long as it's delicious and tastes good, we're okay with that.
So are we.
Awesome. Okay. Oh, one that I should actually highlight. The thing that I actually kind of ignored. If you're tasting the wines, you might notice that all of them are on the dry side of the menu too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So everything we do is wild fermented. We also don't filter anything. So whether it's on the classic side or the funkier side, it's kind of the same philosophy for both categories of wines or all categories of wines. Anytime that you don't filter anything, it means that you've got to let your ferments go all the way through to the finish. So you will end up with a drier wine. More often than not, though, as long as it has some nice tannins and some nice acids to it, it also makes it a really ageable wine. In terms of things like Riesling, which you would normally not find as many dry examples of, we actually make that exactly the same way as we make a Chardonnay. So it's fully barrel fermented as well. The only difference is the oak that we use is a little bit older because we're not really looking for oak flavor on that, but more just using the barrel as a vessel. So you get this like really nice dry Riesling that still has a lot of texture. And I think it's a great wine with like a little bit of ceviche or something like super like lime and citrus driven, a little bit of hot peppers on it. I think it's pretty fantastic. Moving on to reds. And again, if you have any questions at the end, I'm happy to answer any questions. But the I believe the only two reds that you have might be the Cab Franc and the Baco Noir. The Baco is a pretty important grape, I think, in Ontario. It is what a lot of our industry was built around back in the 60s and 70s and probably into the 80s as well. And it's a very pigmented kind of high acid grape. Really fun for I guess it's kind of become known as a little bit more of a barbecue wine. It's great with game meats as well. So a lot of like richer stews really do well with it. Baco can be pretty high acid though. So in a cooler year, which is I think 2019 is, I believe, the one that Stephanie has, it actually works really great as a chilled wine as well. So it could be that like chilled summer red. And then on the opposite side of the scale, we like our Cab Francs, pretty big, pretty sort of, not necessarily super oaky, but like big in terms of not like having a little bit less of that sort of green bell pepper aroma. So we like our Cab Francs to go a little bit earthier. So the vineyard that we use for our Cab Franc is actually in Niagara. And it's one with, pretty much it tastes like what comes, like the place that it comes from, right? So deeper soils, a lot more heat, and a lot more of those dark berry kind of characteristics and really sort of earthy, savory elements coming through. I think it's a really fun wine.
Oh, it's really good. Said we sold a bottle as soon as we opened.
Awesome. So do you have any questions? Any questions on the wine?
Wine, the winery? Anyone? Today? Everybody's too busy drinking.
How many acres do you have?
I don't know if you can hear him. He's asking how many acres.
So in terms of how many acres we have?
Yep.
So we farm about 6.5, 7 acres. And that's split up between about 6 different varieties. So the majority of our planting is Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, just because of the area that it's in, right? One of the things about this region also is we do get early or harsh winters, but they can also kind of hit us a little bit earlier than they would down in Niagara. So one of the things that's important about growing fruit here is that we have to get fruit off of the vines fairly early in the season. So we'll probably, like most wineries around here, would concentrate on the early ripening varieties. And Pinot and Chard, in addition to being delicious, just happen to be early ripening grape varieties as well. So it lets us harvest it, and then we have to hand tie each of our vines down closer to the ground and then cover them up before we get the first snowfall. So we need a little bit of time for that. So we have about the majority of our vineyard is probably Pinot and Chard, and then kind of in descending order is Baco Noir, Riesling, and then we grow a little bit of Cab Franc, Geisenheim, and Gewürztraminer as well. And most of those latter grape varieties we pick a little bit more for sparkling wines rather than still wines, depending on the season, but usually for sparkling.
And so for 2021, what is your impression of the recent year for this recent vintage?
It's hard to say. I mean, we do make a lot of nouveaux. So you'll see on the list, I think half of the wines, if not more than half, actually are 2021s. But I think sort of a common thread to the wines is it depends. There's sort of almost like two sides to last season, before it rained and then after it rained. For anyone who doesn't remember, I mean, at least down here, we had a lot of rain in the fall. So a lot of rain kind of starting middle of September and then kind of like going all the way through harvest. So it was a little bit of a hectic harvest, I gotta say. Like there was a lot of fruit that was coming in at the same time, and you were running out of hands in terms of actually being able to pick it. And I think so the early ripening varieties, I think they'll do fine. The later ripening varieties, they're just going to be different, right? I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a good or bad or better or worse vintage than any other, but they're going to have different characteristics. So the things that I kind of notice on the 2021s is their acidity tends to be a little bit lower, because a little bit more rain in the fall does dilute the vines will pick up that moisture and it will go into the grapes. So the wines will be a little bit lighter on the palate, maybe not quite as, and I would say that the finish on 2021s, it tends to be a very kind of fluid finish. I wouldn't call it watery in a certain sense, but it doesn't come back at you. It's a little softer of a finish than some of the hotter years would have been. I think actually some grapes and some wines show really well in this kind of style. I think the Gewürztraminers, both the carbonic Gewürz as well as the skin fermented Gewürz, actually do really well, and they're really delicious wines. And had you not known it was a rainy season, you would never know, right? It's you just take the wines for what they are. And I think that's what we've sort of learned, that like you can fight it as much as you want to, but until you actually have the grapes in your hands, that's kind of when winemaking and sort of the more creative side of things actually starts.
One last question is, in addition to purchasing at the winery, what other methods, forms, delivery, like what's the purchasing process?
It depends on the province that you're in, unfortunately. So Ontario, I mean, all the wines that we make, like we're not sold at the LCBO at all, right? So we're pretty small, and in terms of, I guess, in terms of size of scale of things, we're very much on that sort of boutique level. So we make about 2,000 or 2,500 cases a year, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. But that is also split up between a whole bunch of different wines. So we probably make about 20 different wines throughout the year. So you can always support your local bottle shop, restaurant. Those are actually great places to buy wines. And especially the last couple of years with COVID, that sort of market for us has really opened up. And we've actually found a lot of support, where you would not necessarily think. Breweries stocking wine now, all those sorts of things have started to sort of happen. But otherwise, generally, any Ontario winery will always be happy to ship wines to you. There'll usually be a little bit of a certain minimum. So our minimum is 6 bottles, and then it's free shipping anywhere in Ontario. We are working with other provinces as well. That goes a little bit more through their liquor board, depending on how that province is structured. But generally, our wines are available at the winery, restaurants, bottle shops, or online.
And said I bought a few extras so that whatever's at the end, if people want to buy them and take them home, I discounted them so that they can take their favorites home with them tonight. That was the plan.
Yeah.
Okay, nobody has any other questions? I want to keep us going. Everyone can raise their glass, have something in their glass. I'm having the new that new field.
The field blend. Oh, actually, I'll talk a little bit about the field blend if anyone has it in their glass.
Yeah, most of us have it. Yeah.
Okay. So the field blend very much is that. So it is the of all the grapes that I mentioned that we've grown, it's sort of on the latter half of that spectrum. So the field blend was actually made up of some early harvested Chardonnay. We picked it a little bit earlier to let our other Chardonnay ripen a little bit more, so the vines could put a little bit more energy into the fruit that was left. So it's about 40% Chardonnay, 40% Geisenheim, which is technically it's a hybrid, but it's sort of a vinifera-based hybrid. Actually, is it a hybrid? It's a cross between Riesling and Céval, I believe. So it's a little bit more neutral Riesling. And then the balance is Gewürztraminer. All of those, except or the latter two, generally a little bit more later ripening varieties. So we picked them a little bit more for sparkling parameters. And then this was actually the first wine that we released in 2021. So this was harvested early. I think the harvest date on this was early September, maybe around September 7th or 8th. And then wild fermented and then bottled pretty much immediately as soon as the fermentation was done. We kept a little bit of the Riesling juice aside, added it back in at bottling to kind of do a little bit of a dosage. And then as soon as it had bubbles, it was ready to go. So it's kind of a good example of what we do, right? We bottle it, or ferment it, bottle it, and then it's kind of ready. And I think this style of wine is fun to drink. You can drink it when it's young, you can age it, and it just goes drier the longer that you age it. So it depends what you're looking for. So initially it had this really yellow apple kind of side to things. Now it's gone a lot more into that sort of Granny Smith kind of side of things. So
I know, it's really good.
enjoy.
Is that the one there isn't anymore?
That's the one.
Yeah, that's the one we like.
Yeah, they're all disappointed that there's none left.
So you gotta get there.
Yeah, it's a fun one. And again, it's you know, the ratio of the grapes is the ratio of what we picked that year. So next year's we'll make this again. It'll be a different field blend. But that's kind of the fun of this.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Having it never be the same twice.
correct.
Yeah.
And if, for those of you on social media, the cool thing is that if you follow them on social media, you'll be able to see like when Mackenzie's making things at the harvest and what's being bottled this year, and you get a lot of hints. It'll kind of give you some reminders as it's time to order, right? Before it's gone.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I'll just do a little plug. Oh, sorry. No, let's do the cheers. Let's do the cheers first.
You're fun.
Do your plug.
Oh, sorry. I will. If Mackenzie couldn't make it tonight, but if you want to get a little bit more sort of her thought process as well, we have added a blog section back to our website again, so you can read a lot of her, and a lot of it is written by her. So you can kind of get a little bit of a sense of like when we're making things, like why we're doing it and why she's doing it. So just a little bit of plug for that.
I'll take the link to the blog and I'll put it in the notes of the YouTube video when I uplink this later. So anyone who's watching this can click on the link and go directly to the blog.
Awesome.
See, there you go. All right, everybody, we want to raise a glass. And I just wanted to say thank you to Alex for taking the time to drink with us tonight virtually. Thank you to Trail Estate Wines for making amazing wines. We're all loving all this unique stuff. And cheers to Ontario wine.
Cheers. Thank you, everyone.